Chapter 2 of The Adventures of a Nature Guide by Enos Mills. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Waiting in the wilderness, that is, lingering in a spot frequently visited by wild life, appears to be one of the easiest and most delightful ways of getting acquainted with nature and the ways of the wild. Going repeatedly to the same place means the visiting of an old scene in which changes are constantly taking place during your absence, and in which the beginning of something new may occur while you are there. So, to have a really intimate and happy acquaintance and a most thorough appreciation of the wild world stage, one must revisit the same stage again and again. Chapter 2 Waiting in the Wilderness. They were a pair of hairy woodpeckers engaged in examining a 14-inch dead aspen. As it was nesting time, I lingered to watch them. After taking a number of grubs from beneath the bark of the tree, the birds centered their woodpecking work at one spot about a man's height above the roots. Mrs. Woodpecker pecked a number of tiny holes or dots, forming a circle about 2 inches in diameter. Then she pecked and hammered away within this circle. Presently this space began to take on the form of a doorway or entrance hole to a nest. Chips and broken bits flew. The birds worked rapidly, one at a time. While Mrs. Woodpecker worked, her mate watched nearby and tried 2 or 3 times to take a hand, but she thrust him aside and kept on pecking and hammering until at last she grew tired and his turn came. After 3 hours a sizable impression was made in the tree and both birds flew away into the aspen grove. I waited half an hour, but they did not come back. After spending more than an hour looking over a beaver house on the bank of a brook, distant a stone's throw, I returned to the aspen, but the woodpeckers were still away. The aspen grove in which these birds were working stood within the seclusion of a mountain forest. Nearby ran a brook from west to east. To the south of the brook, behind the aspen grove, a spruce forest covered the slope. On the north a pine woods stretched away. Between the pine wood and the brook was a grassy opening with a pile of boulders. Through the grove and across the brook ran a wildlife trail. Busy was the life in the woods. I had frequent glimpses of wildlife folk, an occasional view of a one-act play in which any number of performers took lively part. Close to me at one time a weasel, aggressive as a lion, killed a number of mice, and at another time I saw a weasel kill a chipmunk. Among the birds and small animals there were comedies, courtships, feasts, fights, and frolics. All took place in a bit of the wild across which a primitive man could have hurled his spear. The unexpected often happened. The hours never dragged. They were enlivened by a succession of incidents and episodes. Again and again I enjoyed this primeval poetic place for hours, while I sat unmoved and watchful in the scene. Often I lay on a log, or on the ground, or hid in the bushes, or sometimes simply stood like a stump. Wherever I might be, without moving, I let ants crawl over me and insects bite me as they would. Frequently there was a shower of rain, which, when not accompanied by wind or lightning, had a softening, subduing effect upon all the forest sounds. 2 days after I had first observed the woodpecker homemakers, I found them working industriously in the hole, which was now more than 3 inches deep. Only a part of the chips flew out of the hole as they were cut. The rest were swept out from time to time by Mr. Woodpecker. This feat he performed by leaning back and turning his head quickly, his bill acting as the broom. Woodpeckers often select the aspen for a nesting site, probably because of its soft, easily worked wood. Frequently they take dead, partly decayed trees, in which nests are most easily made, and dead trees, too, often are filled with grubs, ants, and other woodpecker food. By the fifth day the woodpeckers had cut the hole to a depth of about 7 inches. The workers continued at their task and finished the nest to average size. After excavating 7 inches into the tree, the entrance way curved downward into the trunk to a depth of about 12 inches, the lower section having a diameter of 6 inches. All this was the work of 11 days. The woodpecker's nest is one of the cleanest and safest, and probably the most continuously comfortable of all birds' nests. It keeps out the rain and excludes the extremes of cold and heat. It is, perhaps, less likely to be discovered by enemies than the nest of any other bird. Rarely does an accident befall it. What a strange, cunning place for young birds to grow up in! How interested they must be the first time they climb up and from the doorway peep into the strange wilderness world. Nearly a month elapsed before I was again in the aspen grove. When I tapped lightly on the woodpecker's tree, 4 agitated bills were thrust out of the doorway. But as they saw nothing to eat, the 4 red-topped youngsters withdrew their bills and, I suppose, settled back to the bottom of the nest. Presently one of the old birds appeared, and instantly bills receivable were again presented through the doorway. After feeding one of the youngsters, the old bird eyed me for a moment with a peculiar look, suggesting curiosity, however, rather than fear. It flew away, and a moment later its mate arrived with a grub in its bill. I missed the pleasure of seeing the young woodpeckers leave the nest and make their baby start in the wooded world. But one October day I was back in the grove and paused to watch as usual the continuous though ever-changing performances. While I was standing near the nest tree, a busy chipmunk climbed up and peeped into the deserted woodpecker nest. Then he climbed up a few feet higher, went round the tree, and came back to the nest. After several times thrusting in his head and forefeet, each time withdrawing quickly and retreating almost to the grass, he finally found courage and bravely entered. Out rushed a frightened field mouse. A few moments later the chipmunk thrust out his head, and with feet on the edge of the entrance hole he looked round like a young lion. The nest became his winter quarters. One day a month later I saw him again thrust his head from this adopted nest. Tracks in the snow at the foot of the tree showed that he came out occasionally. The following May, when I called, a pair of bluebirds were striking and beating at the chipmunk, who was clinging to the tree trunk near the nest entrance. The chipmunk finally leaped off and retreated into the grove, with the birds in pursuit. Again and again I came to linger at my old place. During the summer 5 baby bluebirds were raised in this nest. After they were safely brought off and taken in charge by Mr. Bluebird, the mother bird again filled the nest with eggs. I did not make my rounds again until summer was over. When I returned, the chipmunk who occupied it the previous year, or a chipmunk of the same species and about the same size, was in the nest. More likely it was the same chipmunk, for when I threw a peanut to him he made haste to pick it up, a trick he had learned during my visits the year previous. The next spring in the grove I heard a wren singing with all his might. What busy, happy, aggressive, and confiding little folk wrens are! I was glad when I found that Mr. and Mrs. Wren would keep house for the summer in the woodpecker nest. A robin was a near neighbor, nesting on the top of a high, broken pine stump. Often while I lay or stood watching the wrens, a camp bird, the Rocky Mountain gray jay, came to see me, plainly with the hope that I would have a bite of something to offer. Of all the birds that I have seen, none on first sight is so trustful of man as is the camp bird. That winter and the following summer I often saw a tiny owl come out of the woodpecker's old nest, where a pair of owls must have been nesting, I think. Anyway, for more than a year it was their wooden walled home. That year a pair of woodpeckers had a nest in the upper end of the aspen grove. As they allowed me to approach more closely than other hairy woodpeckers, I believe they were my former acquaintances, whom I had watched 2 years before. In the upper end of the grove another pair of hairy woodpeckers had a nest, nearly 20 feet above the ground, which they had evidently used for 3 summers in succession. A short distance down the brook I one day came upon an abandoned woodpecker nest, probably that of a sapsucker. It was not more than 3 feet above the ground. 2 summers later it was occupied by a pair of hairy woodpeckers. One day, hearing a rather alarmed peek, peek, and thinking that something was happening to one of the woodpeckers, I made haste to the brook, where I saw 2 kingfishers looking upstream. The alarm cry of these birds is very like that of the hairy woodpecker. There on a log sat a mink, evidently the cause of the excitement. The view I had of these kingfishers' heads as they stood up reminded me of the heads of 2 football players. Returning from this inspection, I was astonished to see a flicker alight on the nest tree and take a peek into the doorway of the woodpecker nest. The arrival of one of the bird owners made him take a hurried leave. There are 350 known species of woodpeckers in the world. They are found nearly everywhere that there are trees and in a few treeless places. I believe that there are no woodpeckers in Australia. Of the 25 species found in North America, one of the smaller and more common is the hairy woodpecker. He is a valuable bird and saves many a tree from insect death. The Rocky Mountain hairy woodpecker has a length of about 9 inches. Although he is whitish beneath with grayish legs, the general effect when he is at rest is blackish. The outer tail feathers are white tipped and the wings show spots of white. Just above and below the eye is a narrow white stripe, and a narrow white and red stripe crosses the back of the head. The youngsters commonly have a reddish top. The food of the hairy woodpecker consists of wood borers, spiders, moths, ants, and occasionally berries. Though they summer and nest in high altitudes, often nearly 11,000 feet above sea level, they commonly descend the mountains with the approach of winter and spend the cooler months among the foothills. The Rocky Mountain hairy woodpecker is not so fond of living in orchards and being near people as is his cousin the downy. Although human visitors to his home region do not annoy him, he plainly enjoys the seclusion of pathless forests. These woodpeckers probably mate for life and are quietly devoted, enjoying each other's company without demonstration. For a week or 2 in late spring, Mr. Hairy Woodpecker is noisy enough. He simply fills the woods with drumming, drumming. He calls and calls merrily, with many a change of tone. Often it is a keek, 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 quit, 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 wee, 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 wee. But as soon as the white eggs are laid, there are from 3 to 6 in number, he does his full share of incubating them. I was standing in an open space one day watching the movements of a squirrel when I chanced to see coming toward me Mrs. Skunk and 3 pretty little skunkies. As these skunks came closer, it looked as though I might move shortly. They were walking leisurely, apparently going to a definite place, and all carried their tails elevated at a decorative social angle. Naturally, I did not wish to dispute their right to the trail. I held my ground from sheer will power, but they concluded to take a little passageway about 6 feet in front of me. I stood like a statue to watch them go by. In passing, Mrs. Skunk tilted her head and looked at me out of one eye, but without changing her pace or saying anything to the children, kept on her way. Nothing happened, but never before did I borrow so much trouble in a few seconds. About 30 feet beyond me, Mother Skunk paused and dug out a mouse. Squirrels were about. A Fremont squirrel lived in the pines to the south of my watching place, another a short distance to the north. This little gray fellow is closely related to the Douglas squirrel of California. He is one of the smallest of the squirrel family. He is fiery, curious, and wide awake. He has as much courage and individuality to his inches as any animal I have ever seen. I often heard one of these squirrels as he clucked, chattered, or talked to himself. Occasionally he denounced with terrific violence a passing animal or intruder. The first few days that I watched proceedings in the grove, the squirrel nearest to my station showed immense curiosity. He was unable to make out what I was about. One day he rushed at me and with a savage outburst threatened either to devour me or to kick me off his premises. As I remained silent and motionless, he paused in astonishment. Then he backed up and eyed me eagerly. Again he tried bluff and denunciation. At last, doubtless wondering why I was not moving and whether I should remain long, he gave it up, climbed into his tree, and proceeded with his own affairs. One day when a swarm of bees started to light upon me, I made a lively retreat. This disturbed Mr. Squirrel. He broke out in volleys of peppery chatter that lasted for 2 or 3 minutes. Then he subsided and sat looking at me. I imagined that he might be thinking or saying to himself, "Well, for the life of me, this is something I cannot understand." From dawn until dusk I once watched the activities of this fellow. Though he was sometimes temporarily out of sight, I waited, wondering what the next move would be. He climbed into the tree tops and cut off cones which fell, bounced, and rolled away, and appeared to try to land where he could not find them. Often he stopped to look and listen and make sure that no outsider was capturing his cones. My squirrel friend had a sad end. Lightning one day struck a tree frequented by him on the south side of the stream and killed him. The bolt literally knocked the head off this tree, and it threw half a dozen young birds out of a nest in a tree nearby. Evidently this other tree had been struck twice before. A few years previously a bolt had run down one side, bursting the bark. Through this break a number of beetles had made their way to begin work on the vitals of the tree. But Chief Surgeon Woodpecker was often there, and in a length of 16 feet along this broken trunk had made 16 holes and had probably removed many a borer. Once I saw a large, dignified mountain sheep walk quietly across the grassy opening. He did not see me. On reaching the further edge he turned about, recrossed the opening to the boulder pile, and leaped upon it. After remaining there statuesque a while, he re-entered the woods, stood for a moment, and then disappeared. It was impossible to feel lonesome. Eyes and ears were kept busy, for the show went ever on. It was a 1-ring, a 3-ring, sometimes a 6-ring show all at once. Too often a number of extra good things were going on together. A squirrel would be up to something, while at the same instant 2 chipmunks would be having a boundary line dispute. Along with these, a robin might be noisy and pessimistic over something that may not have happened, while a rare warbler that I wanted to see was darting about in the treetops, and a porcupine was waddling by with dull deliberation. The birds on the other side of the brook one afternoon set up a great ado, as if some enemy were about to raid them, or some other terror were nigh. Of them all, the most excited and pessimistic was the mother robin. She flew and darted about without getting anywhere, all the time predicting the worst possible calamity. When things had almost calmed down, a broad-tailed hummingbird came flying by, scolding hard, plainly much put out because of all this unnecessary hullabaloo. After darting about me for some seconds, with her burnished body flashing and bead-like eyes shining, she alighted, like any bird, on a neighboring limb. This midget made a comical appearance, aping, as it seemed, all the poses of a real-sized bird. Once I looked round just in time to see a coyote leap forward and land upon the grass with 4 paws together. Presently he thrust in his nose and pulled out a mouse. At this instant he caught sight of me and edged off sideways, eyeing me intently. He was not frightened, but apparently could not make out what I was or what I was doing. He passed, doubled, and repassed near by. Then he circled, and when he caught my scent, sniffed the air, but still was not alarmed. He stayed to watch, like a boy in no hurry who had found something new. In the edge of the opening he stretched out on his stomach, with his head toward me. Occasionally his nostrils twitched a little, but at no time did he look upon me with fear or suspicion. Soon sounded a whack from the nearby beaver pond, as if a beaver had dived, and a second later came muffled footfalls through the forest from the opposite quarter. These alarms caused Mr. Coyote to leap up all alert, and presently he hastened away among the shadows. A number of deer came to visit the place. After eyeing me closely from a distance of 30 or 40 feet, they lingered to look round and to take an occasional bite to eat. They were curious about me, but were perfectly at ease, for they had not scented me. Another day 3 deer, which had not seen me, suddenly caught scent of me and were off instantly. Most animals rely upon their noses for chief scout duty, to tell them when to flee for safety. Deer, beavers, and sometimes other animals which saw me without scenting me simply took a brief look, then continued their affairs in a normal manner. But usually when they scented me before seeing me, they were alarmed and thought that safety first required speed. A mother grouse and her family of youngsters came along while I was sitting on a log. I kept perfectly still. One of the youngsters jumped up on the log and started toward me. 2 or 3 walked close to me, and some of the others passed between my legs and the log. Evidently they took me for a bump or a stump. The mother bird was behind, walking vigilantly and with stately dignity. The youngster on the log came up to me and pecked at a button on my coat. I turned to look. This told the mother that I was alive. It suggested danger. She instantly flung herself at me and struck me a slap on the side of the head. Dropping back, she again lunged and beat me with her wings. Her brave behavior was very like that of a hen in the defense of her chicks. Once, just before sundown, a solitaire lighted on a tall spruce top and poured forth his elemental and eloquent song. It was divinely beautiful in the evening hush of the wilderness. He sang with all his melody and all his might. Often in his enthusiasm he hurled himself upward or outward from the treetop, then settled or returned on easy, outstretched wings, singing all the time. No song that I have ever heard so harmonizes with the silences and the feeling of a mountain wilderness, or so completely puts one in tune with the universe, as the marvelous melody of the solitaire. Momentarily one day I took my eyes from the woodpeckers. A rabbit came hopping along, completely unmindful of my presence, passed me, and presently disappeared among the trees. A minute later a soft-footed coyote came following on the rabbit's trail. Though so near, he evidently did not see me, but hurried along and disappeared behind an old pine. I do not know what happened. On another occasion a flutter of wings and a chirp caused me to turn. Near me a little chickadee was working away at a hole in a dead snag, and was just in the act of spitting out a mouthful of dead wood. Here was another nest builder. Once a black bear came along and stopped under the pines on a knoll not far from me. Here he rolled over an old ant-filled log. Out rushed ferociously about 1,000,000 ants, which the bear licked up rapidly with a pleased expression. Presently he came a little closer to me and dug out a mouse. Then he flushed a number of grasshoppers, but in leaping into the air and striking at one of these on the wing, he scented me and at once beat a retreat. One day I left my old watching place and climbed the heights. As usual, I moved quietly and slowly, and once on the skyline I paused to look around. Lying near a spring in the center of the terrace was a deer. As I watched her nibbling at the plants around her, from the position of one of her legs I judged that it was broken, probably by a bullet. Suddenly the wind warned her that a deadly enemy was near. Instantly she leaped up, forgetful of her broken bones. She stood and smelled, but without discovering me. Watching my chance, I slipped away. I had not gone far before darkness advised stopping, and I spent the night by a fire without bedding. Next morning, advancing in the breeze, I climbed up to watch the doe. She lay still nearly all day. Most of the time her ears moved nervously about as she caught sounds from this way and that. When an eagle soared overhead she showed much uneasiness, but moved only eyes and ears. In mid-afternoon she was startled by the fall of a rock mass down one of the crags near by. A short time after this some mountain sheep appeared on the skyline above, posed, and looked quietly around. From the actions of the sheep the doe evidently concluded that all was well. She struggled slowly to her feet, giving a low call as she rose. Soon I knew that a fawn was having a warm meal. I do not know where the fawn had been hidden. Realizing that the deer should not be disturbed for some days, I moved on to enjoy other scenes and left her in possession. Among the actors who appeared where I next watched were a bear and her 2 boyish cubs. A peppery, curious Fremont squirrel in a tree near by saw them approach. He ceased work, eyed them for a time with lively curiosity, then with apparent contempt. At last he went on with his work without voicing a protest until later, when the cubs engaged in a playful scuffle. Mother Bear lumbered along under the trees, unaware or indifferent that the squirrel, apparently in his own estimation one of the most ferocious animals in the wilds, might leap down upon her. At one place she stopped, thrust a forepaw beneath the upturned roots of a fallen tree, and with a lift and a push thrust the heavy, bulky mass aside. She licked the earth a few times, probably to pick up some bugs or ants, and then started on. The cubs dropped behind and began digging. They were having a beautiful time. The mother paused, looked, and went back to see what it was all about. They were working with great zest, and she apparently supposed that they had scented something worth while. In the rudest manner she pushed each aside, smelled in the hole, found nothing, and at once started on. The cubs followed. They came so close to me that I thought surely they would either see or scent me, but they passed me by unnoticed, and a short distance away found chokecherry bushes on the side of a ravine. The mother bear at once began feasting on the puckery ripe berries. Evidently she cared nothing for conservation, for she crushed down and bit off the bushes. She rose on her hind feet, and with mouth and claws together grasped at the laden ends of the branches. Limb ends, leaves, berries, all were devoured. But chokecherries evidently were a dessert for which her youngsters did not care. The berries may have been new to them. At any rate 2 bites satisfied them. The bulging, rounded little stomachs plainly indicated many helpings of other eatables. Even a bear cub can be filled up. For a time they lay relaxed in the sun. Then they rose, stood up, and showed off. They struck out like green, awkward boxers. They struck at nothing, or sometimes with both paws held low and at an angle, and sometimes with one paw held high. Then they had a wrestling match, clinching, hugging, and rolling. Their first belligerent attitude brought rather a vehement protest from the squirrel, who quickly subsided, however, and became a silent spectator. A camp bird also looked on, watching them from the limb of a pine. He observed closely, but did not appear enthusiastic over the exhibition. What a number of incidents in this little area! Quite as many may also happen in countless other small spaces. Often I wondered about things that took place when I was away. What quiet, interesting, unseen incidents that I never even suspected were ever occurring. The aspen grove round the woodpecker's nest was made up of trees from 6 to 15 inches in diameter and 30 to 60 feet high. Most of their bark was milk white. Under the trees were a few bushes and many grassy spaces, in which violets, columbines, harebells, gentians, and other flowers bloomed. In summer butterflies with painted wings floated and circled over the sunny opening. Rarely did they fold their wings and alight. Occasionally one sailed through the woods, following a fairy avenue. Its bright, beautiful color gave a charm and an illumination to the forest gloom. Bees visited the flowers, and occasionally a bumblebee buzzed hurriedly through, as if in desperate haste to reach a certain place, and knowing well his destination. Grasshoppers, too, in the autumn days enlivened the scene. Occasionally a huge fellow leaped out of the grass with a crackling and the flash of color like a fairy rocket before he settled back. Often I was in the grove when the snowflakes fell, and I saw the colored leaves fall one by one. Grandly the moon shone in these scenes. Early morning and evening lights under the trees and through the woods were strange and beautiful. They put the trees at their best and in attitudes different from those shown in the downpouring light of midday. The aspen grove where I frequently watched the manners and customs of our wild kindred was a much better place in which to study natural history than that afforded by any zoo. I wish that a company of boys and girls might have been with me. How they would have enjoyed these real nature stories! I am sure they would have been happy. But thanks to the Audubon Society, to other organizations, and to numerous individuals, boys and girls are beginning to watch, enjoy, and receive the benefits of knowing the wild people of the woods who dress in fur and feathers. Yes, Mother Nature conducts a delightful outdoor school, and it is open every day of the year. Wherever there is a bit of wildness, there are pretty certain to be numerous interesting little wild people. Of course, bird reservations are even better places for this kind of schooling and fun, but the greatest of all places for these advantages are our national parks. Surely one of the best pastimes for children, for anyone, is to wait at a wildlife center and watch the ways of its residents and its visitors. To do this is pleasant self-discipline. It is constructive. It keeps the eyes open and the senses alert. It gives material for thought and compels thinking. It arouses the imagination and wakes up the creative faculties. The faculty of keen observation, the ability to see accurately, and the incentive to watch for things that may happen around us add much to every outdoor day. Such happy experiences as these truly enrich life. End of chapter 2.